Hello, everyone. Um, let's start today with the file handling operations that is more concentrated related to the config file and the log files related to Python. Now, what do you mean by config files? First of all, see, basically, config object is a simple but powerful config file file which is a reader and a writer. Okay, now this is an ini file, round tripper. Its main feature is that it is very easy to use with a straightforward programmer's interface and a simple syntax for config files. Now, yeah. So this config file, it also has few more other features. We'll first go on with the theory part and then really will understand all the importance as well as the practical approaches of how these config files are been built up. So it has a lot of other features though. That is the nested sections. That is a config file normally has sections. We'll go in deep later on. Uh, it has list values and multiple line values, the interpolations. Then when you are writing down the config files or the config objects, uh, these all preserves all the comments and others of the orders of members and sections. Many useful methods and options for working with configuration files, like the reload method, uh, then full Unicode support integrated with a powerful validation system, including the automatic type checking, conversation, and repeated sections, and allowing default values. Um, Moving on to what exactly now, how do I build a config file or how I proceed further? Now I've understood that yes, something config file is related to something which is going to be used to store some data. Okay, now see over here, config file is basically based on or is having an object, config object with it, which will be read and write on the basis of ini format. Now, this ini format is very much similar to what you can find in the Microsoft Windows ini files, right? So this config parser, where I have written over here, this means that it will read and write files created by config parser. So my object file, config object file, is actually created using my config parser. Now, what do you mean by config parser? Is basically a module, or you can say a library, where this module provides us a config parser class which implements a basic configuration language which provides a structure similar to that of the, just I said, ini files which are available in Microsoft Windows. You can use this to write Python programs which can be customized by the user ends easily. Right. So let's say if I want to store some passwords, the configurations, uh, uh, the details of banks and all, right? So somewhere or the other, that these data can be stored in such a way that only the config parsers, or when you have some data related to it, that only can be accessed. Creating this config file basically contains some sections, as we discussed earlier. This contains sections. Each section contains the key and the values. Okay, so it requires keys and values which are separated by equal to, and the section markers are between the square brackets. So these are the syntaxes which are to be followed when you are creating a config file. Now, the password, the keyword, the values, and the section names can be surrounded by single and double quotes. Indentation is not significant, but can be preserved. Okay. Moving on to the subsections, which will be created, are indicated by repeating the square brackets in the section marks. Okay, you nest levels by using more brackets. You can have list values by separating items with a comma, and values spanning multiple lines by using triple quotes, that is single quote or double quote. Okay. Now, this config uh, parser modules can be used to read and write config files. Now, these config parsers do not guess data type, okay, of values in configuration files, always storing. They always store them internally as strings. This means that if you need other data types, you should convert one on your own. Okay, so let's see that how to read a configuration file. Normal way to read the configuration file is, first of all, you need to import the config parser. So from the config parser, you are importing config parser. So please remember this config parser, and C and P are capital over here. So we'll import that module. That particular module is imported, and from that, what we are going to do is, now you can read the config ini file, right? But before that, you need to create an ini file first. So how will you have, these are all the syntaxes. So what you will do, you can have it as config object, whatever you name you have given for that object file, that is equal to the config parser. Now you are calling that config parser, and then you will be actually reading it, right? So when you read it, you are saying it with the config object dot read, and there you are calling the function which or the file which is ini file. Now let's say I want to read something, which is, this is just that you completely read that ini file, and later on you need to read the password. Okay, so I want to read someone's password. So what do I do? User information. Okay, that is my let's say subsection name which I have given. Okay, so I need to access that subsection name. So if I say that this is my subsection name, that is to be accessed. How will you access? With the config object, access that user information, and from that user information, what exactly you are going to access? You are going to access the password. So this is just a way of printing it, that is the password is, and I have called for and format. That means the data whichever is currently available in the password part will be actually converted into string and just will be printed over here. So this is just a format where I am calling the user information, that is this object. And in that, what exactly I want to access? I want to access the password. Okay. So let's go to the for the demo first, right? So we will be going for the demo and then come back for the log files. Okay, so let's see on the demo part over here. What I've done is, let's create one file. Okay, just a simple py file where I have imported from config parser. I have imported config parser, right? And here now I am asking to get the object. Okay, so from the config parser, let's take one object of, let's say, call it as config underscore object itself. Now, why did I do this? Is because the presentation and this should be matching. Now, after that, let's assume that currently we'll be having two sections. Okay, so let's have one section where I have the user information, and the second section which has the server configuration. Okay, so I'll have two configurations, or two of sections, one which is user information and the other one which is the server configuration. Now in this, if you observe properly, this is the config object with the name, right? And with equal to, separating it with equal to, as mentioned in the slides, we have to start with a dictionary. It's actually a dictionary over here. If you observe it, you have a key, that is, this is the admin, which is the key, and this Python for all is the value. Okay, so login ID is the key, Python underscore learners is now the value. So this is the key, and the values set is nothing but a dictionary formed by us for the user information. And you also have the subsection. Now you ended the first user information with the curly braces, right? And now you started with the config object, which is the subsection now, or the second section, which is the server configuration. Now I just tried to write it down over here with the host. What is the host name? Okay, the host name is Python Innovation, something like this. And you have your port, your IP address. These are all general IP addresses and ports which I just mentioned. So this is the data which we write it down. Okay, and now if I want to write this the complete thing into my config file, what do I need to do is that I will open, right? I'll open the config.in file in the write mode. Now we know that when I say write mode, when it does not exist, it will actually create that ini file. So as in previously I had run this program, and so it has already created this config in file. So it creates an in file, writes the data. Now, what will it write? It write all the data which I will mention later. So first of all, we are opening this file, right? We are opening this file in write mode, and I'll be calling it as conf. Okay. Now this conf, in this, what am I doing? I'm saying that this is the object config underscore object dot write. Now what is to be written is this conf. Means what it is going to write down, whatever I had mentioned till here, everything has to be noted down into the config.ini file. Okay, so I'll run this for you, and let's observe that what has actually happened in your config.ini file because of this, right? So when you see over here, this is your ini file, which now has the two sections, right, which is separated by square brackets. Okay, which includes, this is the name of username, and this is your server configuration. Okay, so you have your keys as well as your values. Now, how is the configuration file being submitted? Is the admin is equal to who, the login ID is what, the password is what, the host is what, and the port and the IP addresses are what, right? So all of them are separated with equal to's. Now, let's say that this was just to create a config file. This was the file which is created now, and now I want just to read the information. I want to read whatever. I don't have the access directly as an end user. I may not have the complete access to the config file, but I can read that file. So how do I read it? I'll say that from config parser, import parser, config parser, and read ini file. So first we need to take the object, right? The config file is to be created, the object is to be created for config file, and then we'll say that dot read what, which file is to be written. Read is config.ini file. Okay, so I've just read this file, and now from that ini file, exactly what I want to read is I have to mention that I want to read the information from the user information section. I want to create this object, right? So I have created this object as a user info, okay, from the config object. And from this user info, what is to be read? I want to read the password. Okay, so this is where I have just tried to print the password. Now, if you run this program, you will see over here that whatever password you had given in the config file over here, easy to learn is what is read. Okay, that was the same data which you had put in when you created an INI file. So this is how you can read a config file one after the other, under any section or the subsections. You can read a particular data. Now, what if I want to change the password? Many times when we refer to banks and all, we do try to change the passwords, right? So even your Gmail accounts or any accounts, user accounts, mail IDs, you do try to change the password. So let's say I want to change the password. Now, how do I configure or how do I update my config file? So here, the same thing that I want to import the config parser from the config parser over here, right? And create the object. So these two lines remains as it is. Now, what are you going to change? I need to change the password. So let's say that whose password, where is it? The subsection is what? The user information is the subsection. So here you have the information, user information ka aapne, you will create the object, okay, the config object, and then you say that whatever the password is, whatever the square bracket mentions, what mentions the actual parameter, the actual parameter is what? The password. So now what, it's not the value, it is the key. Okay, so for this key, what is to be changed? I want to change it to new password. So whatever this easy to learn was the password, now I will change it to new password. The name itself will be changed, the password will be changed. Okay, now after I do this, this is just giving the information. I have not actually changed it. So I need to change it by making sure that I open the config ini file in write mode, okay, and write all the information which is now in the user info, right? So now if I run this file, you will see that it is successfully run. And here, if I open my config ini file, now here I see that my password has changed to from easy to learn to new password, right? So this is all about the config files, right? Let's go to the next one, that is where we were supposed to go for the log files, right? So let's say, what is log files all about? So logging is basically is a means of tracking events that happen when some software runs. The software developer, okay, adds logging calls to their codes to indicate that certain events have occurred. Events have also have an importance which the developer has to like the events will be all related to, the importance will be given related to the level or the severity. Okay, so the logging provides a set of convenience functions for simple logging usages, as in there are debug call, right? This is our debug function, the info, the warnings, the errors, and the criticals. So if I see over here, that is uh, the logging functions are named after the level and the severity of events they are used to track. Okay, the standard levels and their applicability are described below in an increasing order of the severity. So the critical one will be having its highest level of priority. Okay, the default level is warnings, which means that only events of this levels and the aboves will be tracked unless the logging package in the configured to do otherwise. Means that the informations like debug, info, warning, right? These are nothing but whenever end user is going to ask for or is going to attend those, then and then only this files will tell you what exact warnings are, or what was the problem related to your files, right? But when it is error critical, they are on higher level of severities and will be given a chance to pop up. Now, when are these levels being used? Okay, so this hierarchy is basically from lower level to higher level of severity. So when debug is used, so detailed information like typically of interest only when the diagnosis problems, then you use debugs. What about the info confirmation that that things are working are as expected? Then you ask for an info. When you want to have warnings, that means an indication that something unexpectedly happened or indicative of some problems in the near future. Maybe in future you may get a problem related to this, so it just gives you a warning. The software is still working. Whenever the warning is given, still the software works, it doesn't stop. What about the error then? It is used uh, when due to a more serious problem, the software has not been able to perform some functions. So that time the error has occurred. The actual let's say the process of your software absolutely stops. That time you get an error. Now, what about the critical one? A serious error indicating that the program itself may be unable to continue running. Okay, so this is a very serious error. It's a type of an error, but a very serious error where now henceforth the program cannot start. This is a small error you can find out with this, but the critical error is something which is really needs to be taken care of. Now let's see back to our demo, uh, where what do you mean by the log files and all, right? So this is a simple log file which has been created over here by me. So let's say what is to be imported. I need to import a module which is logging. Okay, so once I import this logging file, what does it all do is, let's say I have I have tried to, yes, I've tried here just in simple configuration that logging dot basic configuration. I have this is what you need to write down. You need to mention the file name, that what is to be created. Okay, so I said that let's create an example dot log. Okay, so that is the name of an exam log file which I want to create. It is the extension is always dot log, so the name you can prefer it. This is when it will actually create a log file. Now, as in previously I had run this program, so the log file is already been created, but otherwise a new log file will be created. And what should be the level has to be mentioned in the basic configuration itself. That is, I have mentioned the logging as to be a debug, simple debug file. I don't want to go into the critical or error what. But there also, what in debugs, what can I write it down? I can have that is logging.debug, logging.info, logging.warnings. Now, how does an end user as a software person or the developer uses it is that a log file is created, and whenever a debug is been created, what message should pop up when you are running a program? Okay, so all pop-ups are necessary. So it will just give you that yes, this message should go to the log file. This is just a general line which I have written down. So it should message me that what exact error has been occurred. So you can mention that error also over here, or the cause of the debug. You can also write down the .info, that is as information or as an part. So what is if info type of warning is come up, then what? right? And when a warning has been raised up, then what is to be done, or when what is to be written down. So if I run this particular program, you'll see that a example log file is actually created, and in this log file, all the routing is what this is a route which has been mentioned over here. So what will it happen is whenever a debug or an info or a warning is been called up, that is been routed to this message. Okay, so whenever your you call just your log underscore file python file, right? So you will be able to observe that whenever a debug type of warnings come up, or warning actual warning comes up, then what type of message is going to be popped up over here, that is as this too. Okay, so this is all about the uh, log files and as well as the config files. Thank you all.